What is up? This is Patrick from Freaks of the Vine podcast, and you are tuned into another episode of what we like to call Fellow Freaks. This is our opportunity to interview some of the most intriguing people who came to prominence initially through the avenue of Christian metal music or other forms of Christian music genres. But today, our guest is one of the founding members and served as lead singer as one of the main songwriters as well for one of the greatest Christian metal acts to ever grace the genre. Precious Death was formed in Southern California in the early 1990s. The group was known for intense live shows and won over the local scene in LA before broadening their audience to the rest of the country. Veering away from the usual rock songs about partying, the group wrote intricate songs with a Christian message. But Precious Death won Album of the Year and Rock Song of the Year at the Los Angeles Music Awards and was nominated for Dove Awards afterwards. In fact, they were listed as one of my favorite and most underrated metal bands of all time in our FOTV episode that covered the topic of underrated Christian metal music. Our guest, along with guitarist David Bishop, went on to form Black Ball as a side project, which also holds a special place in my heart. But now, with any further blah, blah, blah from me, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my friend and fellow freak, Christopher Scott. Chris, what's up, brother?
Hey, it's good to be here. Thank you so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Very much so. Now, to be honest with you, doing some searching on the web, and I don't get creeper on trying to find information, but tell me so I know you have children. Tell us about you a little bit, your wife and your kids.
Yeah, pretty normal life. Grew up in strange places like outside of Dallas, Texas, in a small town on a horse ranch, and Los Angeles, and spent some time in Las Vegas, and was just always into heavy music from the time I was a kid. I had two older brothers, and I hated their music because they were 2 years older than me. So they only had old music for old guys that were like 13 and 14. So I was growing up at that time when the stuff coming up was Iron Maiden and Metallica and all of those groups. Sure. So that was just what me and all my friends listened to, and I was an early metalhead with very bad hair, trying desperately to be cool at all costs. And that's how I came awesome. Into it. And now I'm married 17 years. I've got 6 kids, and still in a ministry. My dad was a pastor in the Assemblies of God. Do you know the Assemblies of God at all? Because I don't actually know your denominational background.
I'm actually so I'm born partly. I've got Jewish blood in me. Was raised Catholic, came to faith in an Assemblies of God church, and now I've landed in a Bible teaching non-denominational church.
Sure,
that's right. A reform. I'm a reformer. So.
Yeah, well, there's a little place you might have heard of called Christ for the Nations outside of Dallas, Texas, and Fort Worth. And when I was 8, 9, 10, and 11 years old, we lived on campus there while my dad went through seminary.
Oh, okay.
And he was an Assemblies of God pastor. So I had all of that coming up with me, and we weren't allowed to listen to Christian rock.
Right.
So we only listened to rock. I know that sounds strange, but I only listened to heavy metal and all that stuff because my dad didn't know what it was, but he wasn't too sure about that Christian music. So it's funny with me and the Precious Death guys. I remember the first time we got together, and they were asking me about all these bands that they knew, and I didn't know any of those groups. I had heard Stryper because I live on the planet Earth.
Sure, right.
But I was the guy that didn't know any of the stuff, and
that's awesome. Well. So you're involved in ministry. What do you do in ministry?
I'm a pastor of a church, probably pretty similar to you, and I've always worked in church life all my life. Even back when I was in full-time music, I was always on staff at different churches, mostly in church growth and development, which I still do. And I love the church, and I love Christianity, especially the historic old Christianity, because the older's better. You know that.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And just more and more through time, I veered from one aspect of ministry into just full-time pastoring because, as I got older, it was 2 things were obvious. Number one, I was ready for that level of just sheer responsibility and the weight of ministry, which when I was 20, I just wasn't. Right. And also that that was kind of the inevitable place that I would land.
Okay. Well, it makes sense now. honestly, because I've followed you for obviously doing radio, and I'm a geek for worthless or we'd like to say useless information. So it was it's always fun for me, especially back when with doing the radio program. It was called K Buzz Late Night. That was our call sign, was KBUZ. We were an American Family Radio affiliate,
right?
And so we had our own 50,000 watt station, and I had this a station manager who first took us on. She was great. And her husband was a huge Christian metal fan. So she was really open to us. But then she retired to become a stay-at-home mom. And the gentleman that took over met with my co-host and I and said, look, what do you guys really want to do? And we said, what we want to do is not play White Cross. It's no offense to the guys, because Rex is a great dude. I love awesome. Talking to Rex. But like, we don't want to just do them. We want to broaden our spectrum.
Sure.
And he gave us free reign. So where we were playing any kind of like even Christian gangster rap, death metal, more, not just like Mortification, but Paramecium was pop. We would just we would mix it up. We would do college alternative rock. And so everybody would tune in because they didn't know what to expect. And then we would talk. We would play 2 or 3 songs, and we'd stop, and we'd have a guest on. And it was laborious, man. It was a lot of work to do when you're volunteering. And I was a young family man, so I would drag my family up there with me. So 10 o'clock on Saturdays. But anyway, going through all that motion is getting a chance to actually follow you guys. And obviously, being a music lover, there were certain groups and certain albums that stuck out to me. And who was it? I want to say Louder. Guys who actually called your first album is called by Louder Sound as one of the top 10 essential Christian metal albums of all time. Yeah. Southpaw is great. And in no disrespect to Southpaw, brother.
Sure.
If You Must is one of the greatest albums of all time.
That's very kind of you.
Dude, as Dan
I'm never
Aykroyd
offended. People like what they like. Sometimes they don't like any of them, so that's rough on me. But if they like any of it, I'm glad.
Southpaw's great. But If You Must, as Dan Aykroyd would once say, it would rip the paint off your house and give your family a permanent orange afro. So that is one of the greatest albums of all time. And I don't know how you guys, it's a sophomore record. You had probably more time to put together Southpaw. And so, If You Must, tell us about a little bit of that experience.
Yeah, we wrote it on the road. We were touring. It was 1994. Southpaw had been out for about a year, and so we went out to tour in support of it. And we had to write an album on the road. So we got to try those songs out live, which was very good for the songs. You write different when you're writing for the live environment than you do when you're just fiddling around on your guitar in a bedroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, people refer to that as our most confused album, but they don't say that as if they don't like it. It just has variety in it, We just did... We tried to never be held back by people's preconceived notions of what we were supposed to be.
Lyrically, when it opens up.
Yeah, sure.
If everything is relative and there are no absolutes, then why don't I just take this gun? Dude, it was one of the coolest statements because you're just like, yeah.
One of the other things we could do is we could say stuff that people on the average Christian record company couldn't say that needed to be said. At that time, I just started college and I was into philosophy. I was a philosophy major. And so, I'm reading all this stuff and I'm trying to understand one of the biggest questions they have in philosophy is how do you know what's right and how do you know what's wrong? And it's very easy for Christians to say the Bible, and they're not actually wrong for that answer, but it's still a little complicated.
Sure.
When you're talking to other folks. And so complete and absolute moral relativism, where what's true for you is true for you and what's true for me is true for me, is just one of the most laughably thoughtless ideas in the entire history of the world. It's not just us. It's not just Christians. You go all the way back to Plato and Aristotle and all these old dead guys, and they were also going, well, that just doesn't work. There has to be some things that are right and some things that are wrong. The question is, how do you know? Because that is a difficult question. But also, how are you supposed to live? So how a person's supposed to live and what they're supposed to believe are the two most important questions to being a human being.
Amen. You just nailed it. Apologetics 101. If you're going to be able to defend your faith, what is it? What is it? And I teach 2 apologetics classes during the week. And I always challenge two.
That's awesome.
One of them is on hiatus for the summer, but the one of them I teach during the week. And I always, you get new people in. It's a cyclical class, but getting people to engage. So why is it that you believe? Well, I've always believed. Good job. Right. That's a great answer. And now let me loftily destroy that argument from a devil's advocate position. But it's intriguing to teach people, if you're going to love God and you're going to love His Word, then what do you say in response, and how do you do it in gentleness and respect? And it's such a task.
I always respect the person that they've never thought too much about it. They just believe, and they know they believe.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Sure.
A lot of people don't really struggle with the big questions, and that they don't struggle is kind of a blessing from God. But if you ever want to go outside and talk to people at the grocery store and stuff, you have to be a little more prepared than that, because their questions are just not your questions. And sometimes they're going to be very difficult questions.
They are. And they're almost generally the same top 25 questions.
Yeah, that's the truth.
But it's always somebody's experience that brought them to that point. And just talked to, got some construction going on in our building yesterday, and guy just said, "Hey, Pastor, can I ask you a question?" And throws me a lot of stuff, and he's going through a charge that he has to actually go to court for today. And he was like, I know Jesus, but I have this, and this as my background. And I'm like, oh man, we've got some layers. But engaging them in conversation and allow them to be heard is half the battle.
Yeah.
And that. I mean, that's humanity 101, right?
Yeah, with a lot of people, it's as soon as their kids get old enough to start asking tough questions.
Yeah.
And they're starting to get influenced by the world. And then you've got a couple of choices. You either start to prepare them for when they're going to be on their own, or you try to hide them from everything until it's too late. And what tends to happen if you hide them from all of the difficult questions and the kinds of people that are out there in the world is when they get out there, they're completely unprepared and they just get smashed. And then they come back and they blame you, which is not good.
Right.
Yeah, so a lot of people, either the kids get to the college age, that age where they're really interacting with the larger community and society, and they have to learn why it is they believe what they believe, or people just have to get ready because they're getting assaulted by it, and they've got to learn how to fight. They got to learn a little spiritual kung fu in there.
Yeah, they do. Well, speaking of which, I want to ask you, while we're on that topic, obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world at all times. There always has been, right? 100 years ago, we were just coming out of World War I. So there's a lot of, layers of humanity over time. But what we're facing today, as a pastor, and this is why I'm asking you, because I'm kind of picking your brain a little bit. We're faced with so much of a different culture and climate right now. It is probably I would be not even reserved to say that it is one of the most difficult times to be a pastor right now, because we're having people who are affected by the mental part of COVID and shutting down and locking down, and then all the stuff that's going on in the world. How do you respond to a lot of this?
Well,
how do you keep afloat?
You said you weren't going to ask any hard questions. I'm just kidding. I thought we were just going to talk about rock and roll.
Oh, we can. We'll go right back to it, I promise.
I always keep in mind that nothing I will ever go through is going to be as hard as the first 3 centuries of the church. I mean, if there were ever Christians that had it rough, they were just constantly getting roasted, toasted, eaten, killed, murdered, tortured, everything for the first 3 to 4 centuries of the church, basically until the rise of Augustine. And that was considered normal church life. The distance between the time when you made a profession of faith and the time that you would die was usually, brief and painful. So this might be the most difficult time for other reasons, but I don't have to go through any of that.
Sure.
I'm not actually afraid of dying just because I have a big mouth about Jesus. But they didn't have to deal with technology, the sciences, the rapid advancement of literature, the internet, the sexual revolution, all of these different things that are going on. They didn't have to respond to those. And we have a generation for the first time being produced in the United States of America that does not know any of their history or background. They don't have that background and all that understanding of hundreds of years of why the church moved to a place of preeminence and why the world is a great world and a nice place to live, even if everybody didn't become Christians, but from the influence of Christianity. That even, everybody's standing outside yelling about their rights, their rights. Well, nobody had any rights until Christianity came. Just
Right.
about everybody was a slave. And if you weren't a slave, it didn't necessarily mean that you were free. So I do think that things will get better and not worse. And I have a theology that affords me the opportunity to say that it might not be on my watch. In other words, it might be that the progress of the kingdom goes on for 1,000 or even 10,000 years after I die. I see myself as somebody who's standing in the gap for a certain time and a certain age, but that I won't last forever. And the only reason I'm here is because previous generations stood in that same gap for hundreds and thousands of years. So, the church would cease to exist if one single generation stopped believing.
Amen.
We pass down our faith to our children and our children's children, and the Bible says to 1,000 generations of those that love him. So there are more Christians on earth today than all the accumulated Christians of every century before for the last 2,000 years. Now, that's a very weird statistic, but
Sure.
numerically, it's true. This is the great age of evangelism. There are probably about 3 billion people on the planet that call themselves by the name of Christ. I'm not saying they're all Christians, but
Right.
the way that we say this is a Christian country, Christianized, this and that.
Sure.
And it started out with 11 guys walking around with Jesus in the desert. So, that's the kind of a historical track record of success that's very, very difficult to argue with. I've been all over the world doing evangelism and teaching and that kind of thing. And last time I was in China, they had me visit 7 churches that were bigger than any church in the United States. This is the kind of thing that's happening there. It's hard to get the kind of data for it, but I've been to them and I've met the people, and Christianity is spreading there by the Chinese government's own statistics faster than at any time in their history. So they're trying to repress it, but it's because they're being overwhelmed by it. In places like Africa, go back 100 years ago before the First World War, Africa was about 2% Christian, the entire continent of Africa. Now it's close to 50%.
Yes, it is.
So these kinds of changes are causing a lot of stress and strain, especially upon the kingdom of darkness. But at the same time, the gospel is having a kind of success that is, unprecedented in human history.
Amen. It's funny because the church we work with down in Kenya, they are. It took a while for me to just, all we do is minister to them, and we help them, and whenever they need help. But we help them. I go with the pastor. We get exegete scripture together. He just wants to make sure that he's balanced. And one thing that we had to uncover was the multitude, the layers of the prosperity gospel that put them on with a complete wall in front of them. What does he want from us? That was their take. And he was like, no, he doesn't want anything from us. He's just trying to help. This church is trying to help our church. And it took a while, but now they completely trust us. But that's unfortunate because they had such a influx of missionaries from Catholicism and then also from the prosperity gospel, which guys like Kenneth Copeland have no problem announcing that they're going to be going there all the time anyway to do some big rally.
Sure.
And it's just we have transported that prosperity gospel stuff into that country, or those countries and that continent so badly that they are now burnt. And so it is going to take a while, but I believe without a doubt that the trueness of the gospel will always prevail. It always does.
Yeah,
always
by
has.
saying that, I'm not saying it's all perfect and it's well-rounded. It's very immature in its faith and its understanding of God, which is why it's so good that, good denominations are over there putting in seminaries and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
That their own teachers can mature that faith and steady it up and strengthen it.
Absolutely.
It is weird that the first explosion of Christianity down there did come through faith movement, which is notably, bad theology. It's not about how much faith you have will draw money to you and stuff.
Right.
It's ridiculous to think that was the message of Jesus.
Right. Well, the gospel is antithetical to that point. But
I find that God often uses extremely weird things to bring people to faith. Somebody's in a hotel room in the middle of the night watching some terrible TV preacher, but they prayed a prayer, and then they start going to church, or they start listening to those Christian heavy metal albums, or that's another like silly thing that God will use for stuff.
Right.
So there's good and bad, and the bad is sometimes really bad, but I like to think that God will use whatever He wants, and He doesn't really consult me on those.
Yeah, amen to that. You very well said, brother. I like that. I want to go back to the music because that's initially why I had brought you on, and I do appreciate you, venturing off into some other branches there. That's awesome. Did you keep in contact with the guys from Precious Death over there? I mean, obviously, I know you and David kept in, but
sometimes more and sometimes less. But we've always been in touch. But now more than ever, which is kind of weird. As we've gotten older, we text almost every day.
Wow,
and it's usually
awesome.
something political, like look at what these guys are doing, or somebody read a good Bible text or something like that. But almost every day. And of course, we're working on music for the last 6 or 7 months, so it's
that's awesome.
Yeah,
do you reside in Memphis?
Well, I reside in Memphis, but the church I pastor is just over the border, because Memphis is right on the border of Arkansas and Mississippi.
Sure.
Just over the border in Mississippi.
Gotcha.
So it's kind of like a Memphis church, but it's a suburb.
Oh, no.
In Mississippi.
I was curious because I know that the studio that your daughter has been doing some work in, which has been fantastic, by the way. Those are great clips. You got to be very proud of her. That's awesome. Yeah. But that's been obviously in that studio's in Memphis, so I was just kind of curious if you were still there or not. Very cool that you are still, you guys keep in contact. Now, with those, is there still shrapnel left in Southern California from where Andy was just slapping the bass, brother? Because that guy can just, my goodness. I'm a bass player, so I'm a huge fan of Andy Kohler, man. That is just, goodness, that guy is good.
Well, and he's still just a tremendous, it's weird how, we just took a 10 or 15 year break. We didn't even really mean to exactly. Guys got jobs and they had families. You know how that is, because we were never those guys that were like, we're rock stars. We're just going to make all our money off doing music. We didn't make money off doing music. We sold a lot of records, but most of that went back into making more records. So we always had jobs. We weren't none of us were starving musicians, which is also good.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, because Metro One doesn't. They're not a business to not make money.
Lovely people, but barely business, mostly ministry.
Yeah, that's true.
So they didn't make a lot of money.
Weren't you guys label mates with T-Bone? Is that right?
Yeah, I still know T-Bone. I haven't talked to him for years though, but he's still out there. Somewhere.
What a great rapper back then.
We used to get together every once in a while.
I remember.
I never understood a word he said, but he was awesome guy.
Such as rap, my friend. Such as rap, for the most part. No, there's some great musicians out there too. When you hear somebody like myself say that "If You Must" is one of the best, that's not my. It's just my humble opinion, and I say that "If You Must" is one of the greatest albums of all time, secular or Christian. I just want to know what your initial feeling is on that, because you created it, you've got it in your past. It's almost 30. It's a record that's almost 30 years old, so that's one thing. When I go back and I still listen to it, it's still relevant, and I just want to know what your thoughts are when you hear people say things about your music like that.
Well, I know that I can say this to you. I couldn't say it to just any person, right?
I'm getting
if a
ready
young
to feel
fan were to
special
come
here.
up and they were 12 years old and they say, "This is the best record I have," that's just because he didn't hear his sister's record yet. You don't pay any attention. You can't listen to that kind of thing. You're not going to go crazy and start thinking, "Oh, I am the super artist anointed by God," right?
Right.
It's a rock and roll record, and you love that people appreciate it. Right now, Precious Death is going through a weird renaissance. One of the reasons that we kind of have to do another record is because the demand is so high. We didn't do a lot of music, But there's this whole new generation that's all like under 16, and they are like the serious, hardcore Precious Death fans.
That's
and then
awesome.
They like find us online, and we're like these old dudes.
Right.
But so be it, right? So it's still relevant, and the younger people that are coming back around to that music are finding it, and it's probably selling more and being heard more now than at any time in its history, and that's pretty cool. But when people say something like that, it's cool to hear, but you've got to distance yourself from that a little so that it doesn't make you go crazy. I mean, one of the things that has caused the most damage and destruction, especially to Christian souls, is getting a little money or getting a little famous, right? Those are the two dangerous things. So,
Agreed.
So you love it, but at the same time, you've kind of got to ignore it.
Well, and there's a level of, as we grow in our faith walks, our sanctification, we know that there is a level of humility that Christ begins to really tear us apart as he's rebuilding us.
Yeah.
And so I imagine for that part of it too, that's probably has a lot to do with it, because you don't want to be like, I will not boast. I will boast only in the Lord. And
it has almost nothing to do with you. Everything's a gift from God. Either gives it or he doesn't. You thank him that he gave it, but he didn't have to. And if you get too cocky, he can take it away. There's nothing that, if it's not best for your spiritual well-being, you can't lose.
Amen to that. That's right. Now,
and that goes down to everything.
How much do you keep up with? Are there any of these other bands from back in the day that you guys, you yourself, have remained good friends with?
I'm the person that kind of stayed in touch with everybody through the years.
Did you?
Yeah, so I'm still in touch with all of them. All the guys from the old days. I don't want to use a bunch of names, but pretty much, yeah. All the guys we used to play shows with, still in touch with. It used to be on MySpace. Now I'm on touch with all of them through Facebook.
Sure.
And, I get notes from them from time to time, or, I'll fly out and do their wedding, or I'll baptize their kids, or,
Right
so
on.
It's aged with time, but, we're still in touch.
That's
and
awesome.
A lot of times I'll be the one that'll get an email or a text from somebody, and I'll forward it to the other Precious Death guys, because we get, stuff all the not everything, because that would be laborious, but when somebody writes something nice about the way the music was good for them and that kind of thing, I always send it to the guys. Yeah.
I want to share one quick story with you. It was about Gary Lanier. From Tourniquet. I interviewed him years ago, and then I interviewed Ted, and it was after Gary had left the band. And so anyway, I caught up with Gary about 3 weeks ago, and we had a really nice exchange. And I had prayed for that guy because he walked away from Christianity. He wrote a book about his secular standpoint. It was a manifesto about when Christians lose their faith. And I thought, man, as a guy that wrote the lyrics to Push and Broom, which made me weep off the, Vanishing Lessons album. And I thought, how is this guy? What is wrong? And I thought, well, I'm reading the parable of the sower, and I'm like, oh, it makes sense. But I literally prayed for that guy. And then to find out that he's back in his faith walk.
Yeah.
And it's really a great story. And he's back. They have a new album out, a new band with a couple of the old Tourniquet guys. And I just got it about 2 weeks ago, and it's really good. And I sent him a message that said, hey, thank you for some of the lyrics you wrote over the years. It really has impacted me. And he shared it with the other guys before he responded to me. And I thought that was really nice. That he was like, hey,
that's awesome.
They really appreciated that, brother. And so I had lost my first wife to leukemia after a 10-year venture of being away from the church. And I was never going to walk back into the church. And I came back to the church as a promise to her after she passed. And I am now the pastor of the church I walked into that I was only supposed to come to one time.
Wow, that is an incredible
story.
Story.
It's a true story. It's like watching a Hallmark movie or something, but I'm the recipient of God's beautiful, merciful grace, and that's all it is. It has nothing to do with what I did. I just followed what he led me to do. I shared part of that with Gary, but it's just really cool to get to know these, to see where your path went and how.
Well, I've talked with a lot of the guys while they went through faith struggles and that kind of thing, including a lot of guys that were, way bigger than I ever get. I had a radio show in Los Angeles for almost 20 years that we just did apologetics. It was called apologetics.com.
Really?
So that was our website, and so a lot of people would call me when stuff was tough, and we would talk through it sometimes for years. But even with guys like Gary, I never doubted he was going to be back. It was just, sometimes a guy's got to go through some stuff.
Yes, he does.
And from our perspective, that's like not okay, but from God's perspective, really, it's okay. He knows what he's doing and where he's taking them and what he's going to do with them. But, every once in a while, there'll be somebody I know, and they'll go on the radio or they'll go on TV, and they'll be like, I'm not a Christian anymore. And I'm always like, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe
but
you don't know.
You'll probably be back. Give it 10 years. God's not in a rush the way we are.
Right.
We want consistency, right? But, there were times in the Bible when people went through their tough phase, and it would last 20 years. Right? Or 30.
Yeah.
So you got to be patient with people. And just because people say something that's very disturbing to us, you got to know that everybody's in their place. And God's walk with them, I don't get to manicure it. I don't get to pave it for them. Everybody's on their walk, and you do pray for them, and you hope for the best, and you're there for them. But God's going to do what he's going to do.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
Frankly, not everybody's going to make it.
That's
also.
right. That's right.
But for the most part, they generally do.
What's your favorite Black Ball song?
Wow, that's a tough question.
I know. You're welcome.
My favorite thing right now is some of the guys mixed down and put some stuff for a cover for by the Police, Message in a Bottle. So it's a brand new cover that just came out off of a band that hadn't been in the recording studio for 15 years. So that was pretty cool. So I'm listening to that pretty regularly.
Okay.
And it's doing well on Apple and the other online sites too, which I was surprised by. It's getting 10,000 listens or something like that.
That's awesome. Okay, and I gotta switch this over to Precious Death. What's your favorite? What would you say is maybe your crowning achievement with Precious Death?
Wow, man.
I
didn't know that would be so hard. That should be easy, right? Well, it's probably, the song Southpaw. That's the biggest hit we ever had. And it was really kind of the platform upon which all the other stuff came, because that was a very popular song. And it opened up doors for us to play in places we wouldn't have been able to play. Back when we started out, we started real early, 1989, 1990. We recorded the Stinkin' Demo in 1991. We recorded Southpaw actually in 1992. Didn't come out till 1993. But from that time, we had talks early on. We were going to play. We were all Christians, but we were going to play in secular places. So early on, I made calls, and every place we played was a bar or, some kind of a dirty snake pit or, just terrible, terrible places.
Sure.
We went out to all these places, and we played. So a lot of the legitimacy for that had to come down to, okay, were you good enough to play with the big boys? Because here's the thing. Even if bands in Los Angeles didn't have an album out, they were all great bands. And if we went in there as Christians and we couldn't stand toe-to-toe with them, we just would have been crushed. Now, they were all, I'll say it, they were all better than us. But we actually got bigger than them, which is kind of a strange thing that God did. We just had the success for whatever reason. So while a lot of other bands were playing churches and the circuit and all those other things, we were playing mainly bars, which was kind of weird when we'd show up and all the Christians would pack their way into the bar.
Right.
When I was 14, I played the first time. Do you know anything about the bar scene in Los Angeles?
I do, actually. Troubadour and all those.
So you know the Whiskey and
yes.
the Troubadour. And
Whiskey
the first time I played the Whiskey, I was 14 years old.
Were you really?
I went in there with a band called Nightfall, and we played, and then started playing again with them with London Gray a few years later. And
okay.
So I was really in tune with the whole bar and music scene in Los Angeles from a very early age. Had played hundreds of shows out there. So when we got together with the guys about 1990, we just segued straight into those clubs and started playing those clubs. Now, those were tremendous times of evangelism. we went to a church called Sanctuary. You know Bob Beeman? Have you ever met him?
Yeah, we just discussed about Pastor Bob's podcast that he still has out.
He's an awesome guy. We're still in touch. I just talked to him yesterday. We've been in touch 30 years easy. So a lot of the folks that were close to the band were also going to that church, and we went to it too. So we would go into a place like the Whiskey, and it would be $8 cover charge, 2-drink minimum. And we would wipe them out on Sprite and Coke. You know, they hated the fact that they were not selling any alcohol when we came in. But we'd go in there, and it would be a tremendous time of evangelism. And so many of those people would end up going to church on Sunday morning. So all of those bars, you know, and all of those music hangouts, that was where we did our evangelism, and it was good.
That's awesome. Now, are you originally from Los Angeles, or were you from outside?
I was born in Los Angeles, but grew up a lot of my life in a small town outside of Dallas, Texas called Duncanville, where my dad had quarter horse ranches. Okay. But most of my life in Los Angeles.
Okay. I'm originally born and raised in Riverside.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, now I'm outside of Kansas City, in the capital of Kansas, in Topeka.
Yeah.
So dropped off here and left for life. So amen. Well, I want to throw you a couple rapid-fired questions, okay? Sure. And these are just things, 4 quick questions that will kind of pop up, and you just answer whatever comes to your mind. You're quite a reader. We've known this. In fact, the guys from Big Tent Revival I met after a show, and it was I want to say it was Spence. It was Spence and Steve. I had a really nice conversation with them, and they're like, "Yeah, you do. So you play some Christian metal and rock like that?" And I go, "Yeah." And Spence goes, "You got to talk to Chris Scott because, man, that guy reads everything." I said, "I know. He talks about that, but..."
You know, it is. Once you're a pastor, you never get to read anything again. You're too busy.
Dude, I've got a bookmarker in 9 different books that I really want to finish it. Dude, I can't finish it. Yeah. So have you what was the last great book or your favorite book that you just read most recently?
Oh, well, I found this interesting one. Hold on just a second. There's this guy named John Frame. Have you ever heard of John Frame?
No.
He's famous in some parts, but I met him 20-some years ago, and he wrote this huge book. That's probably backwards on your screen.
But it says, it's forward.
Fo Yistero e Yalasafai. No, I'm just kidding. It says... A History of Western Philosophy and Theology. Now, this guy has been everywhere. He went to Oxford. He went to Princeton. He went to all these places. He was always a Christian, and he went to Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia. So he's written philosophy books for 40 years. And finally, I would say he's mid-80s or he's 90 now. Still sharp as a razor. But he wrote this to be his synopsis of... the History of Western Philosophy and Theology. So I've been reading it. I don't know what he's talking about most of the time, but if I catch like 10% of it, I think I'll get ahead. So, on the back, I opened the back, and he's, I just talked to him the other day. I opened the back, and he's got, you know how they have those little blurbs where people say this is a great book? He's got them from like John Piper and D.A. Carson from Trinity. And Peter Lillback from Westminster, and J.I. Packer, who's like one of the most influential Christians of the last few hundred years.
Yes, he is.
So, this is what I'm reading. It's pretty heavy. He goes through all the big dudes and all their big brainy thoughts and all of that stuff. And,
That's awesome.
So anyway, I like this book.
Oh,
Another huge fat book I will never finish, right?
I actually just finished I took a little time off, and I just finished Kingdom of the Cults by Walter Martin. And it was kind of re-edited a little bit by the late Ravi Zacharias. But
those are the guys that trained me back in the days. Not him himself, but his students. He had 4 main students, including Rob Bowman and Craig Hawkins, and some others. And those are the guys that took me through school and took me through seminary and that thing and trained me to do radio. And
Really?
put me on their show. And that's why I hosted that show for 20 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I have a face for radio. You were a lead singer, so congratulations, Chris.
Rock and roll, dude.
That's rock and roll. Have you ever written a book?
I've written some stuff, but just like, I don't do music under my real name. I don't do books under my real name either.
Sure. Okay. Anything you ever want to share with me, you just send me something through Messenger, okay? And
I find that I
check
have
it.
weird parallels in life that don't do well together. If you want to be like taken seriously in theology and philosophy, don't do so many rock albums.
But Tim Challies called you out in a
Yeah.
positive way. That was really cool. He was like, he clearly, how did he say it? He said something to the effect, I think I saved it here. No, I didn't say the word, but he said you defended the doctrines of grace, and something to that effect. And I thought that was great because, yeah, I'm a huge R.C. Sproul and Vodi Bakum fan,
right.
and I appreciate that.
Well, here's something I've always done, and it's kind of obvious. I do whatever I want. Now, I know that could sound very self-indulgent, but I don't mean it that way.
I do what I want.
It's not wrong. I love heavy metal. I've loved it since I was a kid.
Right,
You
right.
know, I can still get up right now. Have you ever, Queensryche, right?
Absolutely.
You know that song "Take Hold of the Flame"? It's
Oh.
super old. It's
Oh, yeah, it was off the Warning album.
1982 Warning album. When I was like 11 years old, I would stand up in my garage and I would sing that like 9 times. Take hold of the flame, and my little, I hadn't gone through my change yet, so I had this little tiny voice, and I just loved it, man. And I can still get up and sing it right now. You want me to? I'm not gonna. I'm just kidding. But
You should. Just- we're all set.
But it's okay. So it's easy for me to make folks uncomfortable because I don't care what they think. I care everything about what God thinks. And in some regards, the people that I love and that are around me and that I serve, I care what they think to the extent that, it's good for them. But like everybody else, I think, a remarkable capacity to not care what anybody thinks. And
You can't.
So, yeah, you can't do anything if you sit around waiting for people's approval on stuff. Or that they have to think well of me. It's not good for stuff. So
Right.
I write what I write, and I believe what I believe, but I'll argue with you about it. And I do the music I do, and if people don't like it, don't listen. Because, I'm going to be dead soon.
Amen. I was listening to Living Sacrifice pulling into the parking lot
Ooh.
a couple weeks ago. It was up kind of loud, and the older lady was like, "What is that?" And she was laughing, and she
Ladies
knows.
in your own church?
Yeah. They're really cool about it, but they have to like it. But I think I have my oldest is 30, and he does the podcast, The Freaks of the Vine, with Gage here and I and another lady, and he grew up on your music and a lot of the stuff that obviously I indoctrinated him on. But one thing that we did share is he said that he's like, he always worries about Dad in the fishbowl. He's like, Dad, you just got to be really careful. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. And I'm still going through a really heavy buffering part of my sanctification that I've got to be careful of, because 8 years ago I was still not in the church. So that's not a long time. But it's amazing at what God does, and He rebuilds us. At the same time, there are things I will not make apologies for. I am a diehard Chiefs and Royals fan, and I'm a diehard metal fan, and I don't think I have to make an apology. Even though, do I have to broadcast it? Or, you know what I mean?
I totally know what you mean.
There's just stuff that, I am remarried, and I married a Broncos fan. And so we are.
So you're a little ashamed of that, but I'm just kidding.
We signed a prenuptial agreement that we would not divorce over the AFC West Division rivalry. But no, there's just things that we learn as we go through, and I do appreciate what people say and what they do. But yeah, you got to get to a point where you don't care on a lot of that. So. When I was writing a song, continuing on with as I made my rapid fire way too long, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
When I was
Not
writing,
in any rush.
I used to write music and play as well for a long time. I was in a 3-piece death metal or metal band, progressive metal band with my son. We had I would always get bogged down with lyric limitation. With your ability to at Cornerstone, there's a great video online of you still just preaching the gospel. How did you ever fit that into lyrics? How did you fit your brain into lyrics, brother?
Just never think about it.
Attaboy. Good job.
Just say what needs to be said. Be direct. Don't overanalyze it. You can learn a lot about lyrics from the Beatles, right? They were like the biggest rock band of all time. None of their songs make any sense. All their songs are stupid, right?
Rocky Raccoon.
Awesome.
Yeah, right.
They're just saying what needs to be said, right?
And it rhymes.
I know there's always like, a Neil Peart or Geddy Lee out there who's going to write, a master's dissertation or a PhD work in every song. But those guys are like one in a bazillion. And the rest of us are just saying what we think needs to be said, usually as clearly as possible. If no one can figure out what a song means, on the one hand, they get to make it mean whatever they want. On the other hand, you haven't really communicated.
Yeah, true.
If you can make it as simple as possible and still cool, that is like the essence of good lyric writing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well said. I like that. Are you, not that you have to pigeonhole yourself, I just want to ask you this. Are you a post-mill, all-mill guy?
Kind of like R.C. Sproul, when he was asked that, he was uncomfortable with it. So am I. I think the recent war and battle between the all-mills and the post-mills
is unnecessary, because you can really see from both angles of them.
Yeah, and here's what it gets down to me. There are basically 4 millennial views. There's the classic premillennial, there's the dispensational premillennial, there's the amillennial, and the postmillennial. If we're really just talking about the millennium itself, it only occurs in chapter 20 of the Revelation and only in a few verses. That's where you get the word millennium, but also the idea. You can easily draw from that text that Christ returns at the beginning of the millennium, then there's a millennium, and then the end of the world. Or you can easily get from it that something happens at the beginning of the millennium, but he really returns at the end of the millennium, or post-millennial,
right?
And then there's the end of the world. And there are troubles and problems in either interpretation of that text. But if that's all we're talking about, I don't really have any reason to be pre or post or mid-millennial or any of those
I
things.
think the only thing that
You're talking about major exegetical aspects of the text. I think everybody analyzes them the same way.
There was a evening of eschatology that Piper held, and he had Sam Storms, who was actually a guest of our early guest of our podcast, and it was really gracious of him joining us. Great dude. But Sam Storms was on this evening of eschatology along with, I want to say, Doug Wilson and John Piper and one other gentleman who was actually dispensational. And they had a really good conversation, and all of them had great points. That's the thing, is I left that like 2.5 hours, and I'm like, I'm either dumber or smarter for listening to this, right?
What do you do when everybody's got great points?
Right.
Or dissonant positions?
But the best thing was that they all ended it saying iron sharpens iron, and they all prayed. They all know this much, because every all 4 positions have the same thing, and that is Christ returns. But I was just curious that there was kind of one of them, more of a level you went to.
I tend more toward what people would call post-millennial. At this time in history, they would call that. But 100 years ago, they wouldn't have.
No.
They didn't really have a hard distinction between amillennial and postmillennial. It was like, they were so unpopular that they really didn't need to make that distinction. Because just about everybody was dispensational pre-mill in the 1920s through the 1950s.
Oh, yeah. Darby had quite a...
I was doing a lot, Trinity International University out in Deerfield, Illinois.
Illinois, yep.
I went to school there for... to get my law degree. And they asked me to teach a class. And the new guys, we were all around a table, and they were talking to us about professorships and things. And they had one line in the Statement of Faith, because it's part of the Evangelical Free Church, where it said, I believe in the imminent and immediate return of Jesus Christ. and all the guys are signing it, and the president of the university is a good friend of mine, and he was my boss at the time, and I said, like, Greg, I don't agree with that. And besides, when this was written, right? He says, yeah, I know when it was written. It was written in 1954. And it was like, 2005 at the time.
Right.
And all the guys that wrote this are dead. And yet they still want me to sign a statement of faith that says he's immediately going to come right now. And I said, I don't know that he's immediate. If he does immediately come, I'm totally for him. That would be a great day.
Right.
But I can't say that I know he's going to come immediately. And, it was interesting, a lot of guys that didn't agree with it, they just went ahead and signed it because that's how you know who the liberals are, right? Because they'll sign anything.
Yeah.
They don't care what it says because they don't believe that much anyway, right? But for the rest of us, we have to actually believe the things that we're going to put our name to and such. And so, I couldn't sign it. And it started a thing that I was kind of out of at that point, where over the next 10 years they went through and they removed that line from the statement of faith of the Evangelical Free Church and the standards for teaching at the university, because there's just no way you can sit around for 100 years believing in the immediate return.
You
right?
can't.
If he's immediately going to return, he's immediately returning, and we will handle things incredibly differently.
Yes.
But if it could be 100 years or 200, you better build some churches and stuff. Things that you will not do if you know the world's about to end. I remember this guy, J. Vernon McGee. Did you ever listen to him?
No, I have not.
J. Vernon McGee is a very famous pastor, and he would always say, you should never polish the brass on a sinking ship. And I remember listening to that as a kid going, yeah, don't polish the brass
right
on a sinking ship. Well, what that means is if it's going to sink, don't do anything good. And that's one of the major failures of that dispensational mindset is that if you know the world's going to end like tomorrow or next week, you're going to act incredibly differently.
Yes.
But entire generations have been born and lived and died under that expectation of the immediate end of the world, and it hasn't ended. Another thing that I did when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, is I went to Hal Lindsey's church. Do you remember Hal Lindsey?
I do remember Hal Lindsey.
Hal Lindsey wrote one of the most
Left
important
Behind
books of the 1980s.
Oh, no, yeah.
Called
Late Great Planet Earth.
Sold hundreds of millions of copies, and I remember reading it when I was, like in 7th or 8th grade, just being terrified of the end of the world, right? And I went to his church, so that was my diet at the time. And I just remember thinking, well, hasn't he been saying it's going to end since like the 1970s? Mm-hmm. And it turned out that he had. And all those things ended up being false. The world did not end. So I was a little disappointed. And this shook my faith as a young person.
Yes.
Kind of had consequences for me. Because I knew people that weren't teaching their kids algebra and stuff because they weren't going to need it in the new kingdom. So, I told you earlier, I came up, in the Assemblies of God church. They were all about the end of the world. And here I am now, 54. World still has not ended.
Right.
It just seems to be chugging right down the line. But here's the thing. Do we now stop our Christianity and go, well, it was all a wash, and now we should just give it up because the world didn't end, so the Bible's false? Or did that entire line of reasoning from the Bible actually wasn't exactly what the Bible was teaching on those things? Maybe they were wrong about their interpretation of a few phrases in there.
I agree with you. I got a little worked up on eschatology for a period of time. I've settled down now. I'm not in the rage stage anymore, if you know what I'm talking about. But I still have great issue with the notion of a secret rapture because I just feel like what it's done is it created it's created a couple of generations of people why bother mentality, like, why rearrange the deck chairs in the Titanic if it's going down, like you said about the polishing of the brass. And I think the big thing is, as I always tell somebody when they come up and they say, you don't believe in the secret rapture. And I said, point is, I show them. It says we will be caught up to welcome our Lord. Whole nother day, another topic there. But I said, I do believe we will be caught up with him because the word tells us that. But what I don't believe is in the secret removal, because I think it's created in North America a lot of lazy Christians. And
especially in the middle of the tribulation and that whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I don't get caught up on it anymore, but they know. And because I always tell them, this is how I always end it. They go, well, but what if it happens? And I go, then I'm right there with you. Because that just puts them down.
I'm totally willing to be wrong.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
the
totally
thing.
willing to be wrong if you're right. But
If I'm wrong, it has no consequences for my faith. Because when he comes back, I'm going to look busy.
yeah,
Right?
amen. And then I always conclude. This is the one that I always get them on. I say, here's why I don't make a mountain out of a molehill, kids. Because I said, here's the big thing is that I can't go down swinging if I'm not 100% sure of this. But I said one thing is I am not making any friends by preaching against it.
Sure.
So that's that. And then I move
Right.
on, and then they don't think anything of it. But the big thing is iron sharpens iron, and we've got to be doing that at all times. And if we change our position or our views on certain things, great. As long as they're not the main central, tenets of Christendom.
That's the thing. As you can kind of tell from my story, almost all of my views have changed, but nothing that is structural or essential Christianity.
Exactly.
Not the place of the Bible, not Jesus Christ, fully God, fully man, not the doctrine of the Trinity, not the doctrines of grace and the doctrines of salvation. All of those are the things that are incontrovertible, that are the center of Christianity.
Yes, they are.
The other things around the sides, a lot of those have changed for me because, I know the Bible better in my 50s than I did when I was 10. And it should be that way.
Right.
Sanctification
is a beautiful thing.
As we get older.
That's right. All right. I want to wrap this up with one question for you, and then I'm going to give you a second to share something. But do we have a time frame-ish? If not, I don't want you to. I know there was a lot of people bothering you about the time frame of when Precious Death may come out with some more music, so I don't want to be on that boat with you. But
well, we had a few meetings about it a few months ago because we were going to go in just the beginning of the year and just start knocking it out. But we didn't feel quite ready, and we were thinking, people have waited a few decades. We can wait another year. We're not really under any, tense need to get done right now. So we're just like, we're just going to coax it out, And when we feel like we've got the 10 or 12 songs that we really like, and really I feel like we're already at like 8 or 9.
That's great.
At this point.
Have you heard the new
rush,
Fear Not?
And we're older dudes, and it's.
Have you heard the new Fear Not from them?
I have not, but me and Chris were good friends back in the day, and I really want to hear it. I hear they're going to be at that concert that's going to happen in San Bernardino, so that would be the first time I've heard them and a lot of this stuff live for the first time.
They have a new singer. It's really kind of like southern grungy, that sort of the southern grunge rock that's kind of coming out. I'm really impressed by it, to be honest with you. Spotify has a couple
they're just
songs.
tremendous players.
They really are. And Chris Hell's
every
not
once
with
in a
them
while,
anymore.
really good guys get together and don't make good music, but that's kind of the exception. Most of the time, and being a musician's like being a pastor. You get better as you get older. It's not like the NFL draft where you've got like 6 years and then you're done.
Right.
So all these musicians, they just become killers as they get older. They were always good, but just get better and better and better.
Well said. Chris, we conclude this interview here in a moment. I always like to end this with giving you an opportunity, if you would feel so inclined to do so, to share with your listeners any little parting shots of wisdom that you want to share. It can be about anything that you're passionate about. I would just like to give you the floor, and then we will conclude our interview today. But please share with us anything that you are passionate about that you want to get off your chest or share or whatever it is.
Do you want to hear a tiny clip of one of the new PD songs?
Yes, please. Dude, oh my goodness, that is great.
So we kind of picked up exactly where we left off.
Yeah, you did.
We're kind of laughing about how this is like 10 minutes after If You Must. We just started writing new songs 30 years later.
Wow.
Because we haven't changed or grown up. We're still like,
You still got this, your voice, man. Even sounds even a little bit more refined. So, I mean, you were, well, in your early 20s back then, but dude, that sounded fantastic.
Yeah, we never stopped doing music. We just didn't make Precious Death records. So, all the guys are, better than they've ever been. And, you never know if an album's going to sell any records or not. But with us, the important thing is that we make a good one. It's really important to us that it not suck when we're done with it. More important than whether or not it sells copies, because it's not like we're trying to make money.
I think it was like 6 months ago that If You Must came onto Spotify. We only had I don't think
we didn't put anything up online for more than a decade.
Well, when it got out there, I was giddy as a schoolboy, brother.
Oh,
so man, it was awesome. It was just
by the way, I really appreciate what you do and what your church do. I think it's awesome that you've, not to over compliment you or butter you up, but that you kept it real and you keep doing this and you keep reaching out in this way. It's very important. As you know, there are some people that'll listen to stuff about this that will never listen to a sermon.
Yeah, amen. I know. But so maybe through the light.
I appreciate it, man. Well, I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you for saying that. And I likewise, brother, from a pastoral point of view, you're a real dude. And I'm sure that your congregation is wildly blessed by having you. And through all the challenges that you're thrown at you all the time, and having 6 children and family, and you are obviously the right man for the position in your spot. So thank you very much, man, for what you're doing. So it's nice to have a theological conversation with somebody too that I had a great deal of respect for. So, well, listen, your wisdom has been bestowed upon us for the last hour, and thank you for being so gracious with your time and for giving us a little snippet, my friend, of the new PD that's coming out pretty soon. So whenever it gets out, we'll be patient. I'm not really patient, but I'll be patient with you. All right, Christopher Scott from Precious Death, Black Ball. Go back and get on Spotify, and you can listen, or any other streaming service. Southpaw, and actually, you guys had 3 records, correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Technically, and then the EP, and then but check out If You Must. That's my recommendation. But you can listen to whatever you want, but you can't break me. The title track, If You Must, You're Gone, I'm Here, the Catholic song So Far Away, so on and so forth. That record, brother. So thank you for the gift of music, my friend. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, Chris, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon, and Lord bless you, my friend.
Thank you.
All right.